What up, you Hebrew Mormon lights? There are a few things that I didn't get to outline in my last video on this subject. I understand that there are going to be those who will never accept the truth as long as it conflicts with what they, keyword, want to believe in. However, when one challenges the biased perspective of another, the burden of proof is on them to make as much as possible make sense from their perspective. I cited scriptures, maps, world history, and empirical data to make a case for my presupposition that America is not the homeland of biblical scriptures. But apparently it wasn't enough for some of you, as I received insults and accusations from disgruntled viewers who want this to be their homeland so badly. So let me add more proof that this America is the homeland doctrine just doesn't fit within the objective puzzle of this world's reality. Also, I'm not going to spend any time talking about maps, artifacts, landmarks, Mormon texts, etc. We only talking about animals today, as certain biblical animals very easily and precisely prove the location of where certain events took place. There are a lot of things that physically existed in the scriptures that adamantly prove the location of the stories of the Bible. One thing right off the back is that there are animals that existed in scripture that were not known to the Americas until the past 400 to 600 years, thousands of years after these animals were mentioned in scripture. I'm gonna name a few that I've researched personally myself. The chicken, the donkey, the domesticated camel, sort of, I'll explain that later. The bullock oxen, and the domestic woolly sheep. You literally don't have biblical Israelite history without these exact animals. I'm gonna talk about the common bullock oxen first. Yes, in America there was a distant relative to the typical cow, or should I say standard beef cattle that we're all used to in the 21st century. We are all familiar with the American bison, the closest thing to beef that we know was native to America in ancient times. But were they the cattle that was used to plow the fields in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 19, where it says, and I quote, "So he departed thence, and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him, and cast his mantle upon him." Did the Native Americans plow fields with herds of domesticated cattle? Matter of fact, did they plow fields at all? And looking at historical data and studying modern day native tribes that hold to their pre-Columbian ancient farming techniques, you can see that they did not plow fields at all. The reason why is because they had a technique that didn't deplete the soil of its natural ingredients. Instead, they would burn a field and fertilize it with organic matter like piss and other things to increase soil fertility. But they never used plows, something that was very prevalent in ancient Israel. You can also see that looking at the domesticated cattle, which were most certainly a part of Hebrew ancient culture, by looking at the Aleph symbol of written Paleo-Hebrew text. It looks like the head of a bull and is often associated with cattle in scripture. It is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and is where the letter A eventually traces back to, mainly because ancient people at that time revered the oxen as a certain essential core piece to the survival of humanity at the time. Oxen were much different than bison for the fact that they were important for the purpose of not only meat, but also the fact that they were good for plowing the soil. The American bison was never domesticated in pre-Columbian times. The reason why is because the Native Americans had a holistic approach to nature. Everyone were hunter-gatherers, and they only took what they needed at the time. Buffalo roamed the prairies very freely, and whenever they needed meat, the men would just go out and hunt enough for their village. There is no evidence that the native people held bison captive in the Americas for the use of plowing fields or owning livestock, hence the only reason these animals would even be domesticated in the first place. Many of the Native American tribes practice a nomadic lifestyle, and they travel wherever the bison naturally migrated to in the Great Plains. That sounds nothing like ancient biblical Hebraic culture, in the sense that many of the Hebrews literally owned different varieties of livestock. They even traded it. There was a relative lack of domesticable animals in the Americas before the Europeans came over here. No cows, no sheep, no chickens, no camels, and no donkeys. This not only put the Native American civilizations at a technological disadvantage when the Europeans showed up on horseback with swords and firearms, it also led to the nearly genocidal waves of smallpox and other European diseases that swept across the Americas when the Europeans arrived. It is not completely clear where smallpox comes from, but a lot of evidence shows that this disease originated from raising domestic animals like cattle, and people who live in close quarters to them eventually develop immunity. Native Americans had no such immunity. Smallpox went through native communities like a plague of death. Obviously, they weren't very acquainted with raising cattle like that. But for this to have been the land of the Bible, that is a very huge piece of the puzzle that's missing. I'ma read a scripture in Job to show more cultural evidence that this can't possibly be the land of Israel based on examining the cultures of how animals were raised. Job chapter 42 verse 12 says, Elohim blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. Any of y'all that know what a yoke is know that it is the thing that keeps a creature captive. And our guy, Job, he had 1,000 yoke of oxen. Show me archaeological and cultural evidence of Native Americans holding mass herds of bison in captivity with yokes, and I will shut my pie hole. Speaking of that scripture verse from the book of Job, I feel the need to talk about the donkey and the camel, seeing how they are both mentioned in that text. Starting with the jackass, I gotta keep it real with you. I searched long and hard and I cannot find any evidence whatsoever that the donkey existed in the Americas at all before the Europeans brought him here within the past 500 years. And that's a big sinkhole in this America is the homeland doctrine. Job had 1,000 donkeys. Balaam in Numbers chapter 22 rode on the back of a donkey that started talking to him. The Messiah rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, which means that the land from which all these biblical figures lived had to contain donkeys as part of the native population. If donkeys were never on American soil until white people brought them over here, then how can you say that this was the land? That's like saying that wealthy Roman officials had some 20-inch spinning rims on chariots from 2,000 years ago. If the Bible hypothetically described 20-inch spinning rims, then it is very reasonable to rule out places in the world where spinning rims were not known during the time that they were described in the Bible, hypothetically. And when you look at the Hebrew word for donkey in the Old Testament, it says athon. I think I pronounced that right, which literally in Hebrew translates to donkey or jackass. The people of the Bible knew the donkey, but the land of America didn't. This fact all by itself alone proves that this is not the biblical homeland of scripture. I could end the video right here, but I'm not. Another animal extremely prevalent in biblical culture and text is the camel. But before I make my point about the camel, let me play devil's advocate in this situation and point out that there is evidence that the camel that we all know today had family members here in the Americas. I will humor the idea of these camelish creatures being the camels of the Bible. Was it the same camel that Rebecca, wife of Isaac, mounted belongings onto when she was preparing to be married to Isaac in Genesis chapter 24 verse 61? Was it the same camel creature that the Ishmaelites were traveling to Egypt with cargo and caravans full of merchandise and spices? Was it the same kind of camel that Yahusha the Nazarene was talking about when he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? Now, these American camels could definitely bear the responsibility that the camels of the scripture were known to bear. But did they? Keep in mind that Job, along with his 6,000 camels, also owned 1,000 asses. And Yahusha the Messiah also rode on a donkey, which wasn't native to this land of America in those times. So any Bible verse that mentions camels couldn't have possibly been talking about the American camelops. It's impossible. There's no archaeological or cultural proof that Native Americans even had advanced trade routes that were traveled camelback. I don't see no Mesoamerican art or paintings. I've never heard any Native American legends or oral traditions speaking about camels or none of that crap. They say that these camels died tens of thousands of years ago which makes me believe personally that they were probably in the Americas during the time that the earth was one big continent before the great flood of Noah. Especially seeing how during that time there were lots of crazy looking creatures like dinosaurs, giant bugs, giant birds, giant people, etc. Bottom line, lots of extinct animals. I don't know if these camel creatures were killed off at the same time as these other animals, but what I do know is that these American camels don't fit the description of what camels meant to people in the Bible. Do y'all catch my drift and see where I'm going with this, man? Because the exasperation is really setting in. Animals that existed all throughout biblical culture need to be taken into perspective when identifying the lands of the biblical scriptures. I'm gonna go over the chicken and the woolly sheep very briefly to cut down time, but you should come to the same conclusion as we came to with the bullock, the camel, and the donkey. Now, there are close relatives to the domesticated sheep here in the Americas, but they don't produce wool. Instead, they produce regular fur like most animals do. But it ain't the sheep of the Bible, dog. Also, in playing devil's advocate again, there's a creature, I think it's called Oriamnus americanus, I think I pronounced that right, and it does produce a woolly-ish fur, and it is considered a close relative to the sheep and the goat. And someone looking at this fuzzy creature would say, "Oh, I got you right there, dude, I caught you slipping, a woolly sheep." But before you get ahead of yourself, answer this question. Is Oriamnus americanus a sheep or is it a goat? Also, where's the evidence that this animal was domesticated in mass, used in the Israelite Passover, used as a form of business profit, and used to pay tributes in 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 4 to the king of Israel when Mesha, the king of Moab, donated over 100,000 lambs to the king of Israel? Especially since these were some wild animals that were never domesticated in mass. People hunted these creatures on the top of dangerous mountainous regions, hence the reason why they're called mountain goats. There's no proof that the Native Americans actively used wool or raised whole flocks of sheep in pre-Columbian times. Many of these animals have no ties to America whatsoever besides the time period when colonialists introduced these animals to American soil. The first chickens in North America were introduced by the European settlers. The first herds of oxen and the first woolly sheep were introduced by Europeans. The donkeys were introduced by the Spanish. The Native Americans that were already here did not know any of these animals the way that the ancient Israelites did. They couldn't have. They were brought here by white people. You don't have biblical history without these animals, and so you don't have biblical history in America. Now, I didn't set out to be a prick here to destroy people's dreams and fantasies. There are just a lot of questions that you Hebrew Mormonites are leaving unanswered, and this crap just doesn't make sense. It all gotta add up. The police can say all they want that I fit the description of a gas station robbery because of some small details like my height, complexion, hairstyle, or the color of my clothes. But if I personally have several alibis, including the fact that at the time of the gas station robbery, I was live on Facebook 15 minutes across town at a family reunion, and several witnesses can vouch for me and say that I stayed there for the remainder of the night long after the robbery was over, then they gotta go back to the drawing board. All the evidence must match, and it all gotta add up. Otherwise, all you have are just a bunch of cute coincidences. Now, here's an interesting challenge for anyone who wants to take it. I want to see if anyone can prove that each and every one of these animals outlined in this video, not one or two of them, but all of them, 1. existed in America before Columbus, and 2. were part of Native American culture and lifestyle in the same exact way as they were described to have been a part of the lives of the people of the Bible. Here are the details that I want you to clarify for me. A. Prove that the camelops creature of ancient prehistoric North America was not only used by the Native Americans as a way of transporting goods across the continent of North America, but was even ever domesticated by the Native Americans in the first place. B. I need you to show me hard concrete evidence that the woolly sheep was here before the time of Columbus. Show me proof of this with Native American oral traditions or legends. Show me some Native American clothes made of sheep's wool from before the time of Columbus, or with a technique that was invented before the time of Columbus. Show me some fossils or some petroglyph carvings of woolly sheep on some ancient palace walls or some cliffside rock near places the natives were known to dwell. C. Show me some evidence that the bison buffalo of North America was domesticated, yoked up in bondage, raised as cattle, and used to plow fields in America before the Europeans came here. D. Show me the existence of donkeys roaming around North America before the time of Columbus. E. Show me evidence that chickens and roosters were running around North America and being raised by the Native Americans before white people showed up over here. Anyone who can debunk everything in this video fully with the outline that I've given will get a $100 cash prize from me personally. That being said, I am Elijah Reich. If you thought the info I presented was compelling or you just like my content, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you will always be up to date on my latest uploads. Also, check out the description of this video for my links as well as the challenge that I've outlined at the end of this video. Copy and paste it into your notes so that you can fully debunk my video with credible information that I can research myself. Like I said at the beginning of this video, no maps, no Mormon text, no freaking rivers. If your truth stands, then you should be able to find these animals before 1400 AD. Alright, peace.